Where We Live. My name is Steve Ray. Gail Nyberg's bio on the Feed the Need website says she is retired. It suggests that on LinkedIn as well. Don't believe everything on the internet. Gail might be retired as the executive director of the Daily Bread Food Bank in Toronto after 12 years, and from 15 years as a school board trustee in Toronto, and around 1 year in this area, but she is not retired. Gail was presented with the Order of Ontario for her work with the Daily Bread and children's breakfast programs. She's advised the provincial government on social assistance. She is now the president of the board of directors for Feed the Need Durham, which and after serving one term for a departed trustee on the Kawartha Pine Ridge School Board. Ben Earl may not be on TV or radio as much as Neil Hetherington at the Daily Bread Food Bank in Toronto, but brings a pretty impressive CV to his role as CEO of Feed the Need in Durham. He's had tremendous influence in the business community in Clarington and Durham, as well as social development in Durham, and has advised in the area of basic incomes nationally and internationally. I have a feeling that Gail can tell us even more about Ben that makes him an amazing asset for Feed the Need in Durham and Ontario as a whole. Welcome to both Gail and Ben today for this episode of Exit 425, Poverty in Durham Part 2. Part 1 featured Mark Carlos of Redemption House Recovery, and he could not say enough great things about Feed the Need in Durham and the work you do for the people here. Thank you for being here to speak with us, about poverty in Durham.
Thank you for having us.
Happy to be here.
What does poverty look like in Clarington specifically?
Mm-hmm. Do you want to go?
No,
first?
you go.
So the challenge that we're seeing right now is that poverty in our community, Durham as a whole, but Clarington in particular, may not look like what most people think of when they think of poverty. That doesn't mean we don't have, some increasing concerns with homelessness and sort of more street-involved people and other types of more public poverty. But a lot of the poverty in a place like Clarington is sort of behind closed doors. Households struggling that we may not know, our neighbors struggling that we may not fully know that they're struggling. The challenge is, though, that it's not just about right now. We're not just seeing challenges with people who are really struggling at the lowest end. We're seeing people struggling who have incomes, who may have middle incomes, who own homes. We're seeing a growing number of people who maybe on the surface or maybe from an official measure aren't living in poverty, but are really struggling. And it's so poverty and that struggle with income is really starting to look quite different in places like Clarington than maybe most people would think of.
It's interesting. When I was in Toronto, we used to talk about, whether pay the rent or feed the kids. Now, I think what we're seeing in Clarington is certainly we're saying the rent, but we're pay the mortgage or feed the kids.
Yeah.
Increasing interest rates, hydro going up, natural gas going up, food. I mean, let's just talk about what food's gone up as having people who we might have 3 years ago thought were doing very well are not doing nearly as well and are having to reach out for help.
Mm-hmm.
Does the need look different in different parts of Durham, and does that affect how people are helped?
It does look a little different in some parts of Durham. In the more urban parts of Durham region, you can actually see more of that public poverty. Oshawa, Ajax, even Whitby these days, you can start to see a little bit more of that, what we would call the public-facing poverty. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist in other parts of the region. As I said, Clarington is certainly experiencing its share of a rise of a homeless population in a way that maybe it hasn't historically. But for the most part, in a community like Durham, poverty is sort of looking as like we're describing it. People struggling behind closed doors, people struggling to make ends meet, dipping into poverty. Maybe they're not struggling every month, but they're going in and out of cycles depending on the costs that they have and depending on the income that they have. And that is fairly similar across the region, especially in the urban and suburban environments. The north part of Durham, it does look a bit different. Rural communities do experience poverty a bit differently. It's a little more hidden. It's harder to see. People are spread out more. So it's a little bit harder. In terms of access to service, it doesn't really change how people are helped. The services are generally available to everybody in the same way. What it might do, though, their access may be different depending on where they live. If you're in a community where the services are based, you may have better access to them. If you're in a rural community, you may have less access to programs and services just because of the distance that it takes to get to them. So there's not really a difference in terms of how people are helped, but there may be a difference in how people access services.
Years ago, it was believed that severe poverty and people who are homeless and impoverished seem to be imported from Toronto, but it sounds like it's all pretty homegrown now.
Well, I'm not sure if you want to call it homegrown. Many of the people who moved to Durham and Clarington from Toronto moved because they sold a house in Toronto or they couldn't afford a house, and they came as middle type people. They're some of the people that are suffering now. They're not the people that you are seeing in the banks at 5 o'clock in the morning to try to keep warm. It's not those people. They exist. So I don't think poverty came from Toronto necessarily. I think poverty is everywhere in Ontario now or everywhere in Canada because of high interest rates, inflation, cost of food, increasing gas prices. All of those things contribute.
Mm-hmm. I would add that in the work that we do, while we definitely worry about individuals who dip below official measures of poverty because those are the lowest income individuals in our community and we're probably struggling the most, we're actually more concerned about inequality. And when you look at the data from Stats Canada, inequality is actually growing across Durham region. It grew between 2015 and 2020. Inequality grew by official measures of inequality grew by about 4% for the entire region. They grew about 7% for Clarington in particular. So what that means is that there's a growing gap between those at the lowest end of the economic spectrum and those at the highest end. And that inequality is what actually creates some of the struggle because it changes the way the cost of living in communities, and it creates a gap between what it costs to live in a community and the incomes that people have to actually meet those costs. So that's really the challenge that we're starting to see and deal with, and that's sort of how we think about it locally. And yeah, you might look at Toronto and see that they're having the similar types of change, but a lot of that change is happening right here in our own communities, and it's not being driven by people moving out here or being driven out here from other places.
As the population grows in Durham and Clarington specifically, are you seeing changes in the poverty situation?
Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's a direct link between population growth overall and growing poverty, but as communities become more diverse, as communities become more dynamic, and as they grow, and there's more, you will certainly see a natural increase in those who are struggling in the community. I don't know if they're directly linked, but you will definitely see that increase in the numbers of people who may be struggling in a community as the population grows. The real challenge there, though, is on how we respond. As we see more people who need access to programming and services, our programming and services can't always keep up. And that's frankly true of organizations like Feed the Need, where we're working very hard to keep up. But we know that there's always a lag between what we can do and what the needs might be in the community. And I think it's very true of other services, whether they're government services or other not-for-profit community services. We have to try and keep up with the growth in our community and the demand that puts on what we do.
I think one of the drivers too, Steve, is there's a number of people in our community who are retired and they're on fixed incomes. And if they don't have a cushion, I was explaining to Ben, I'll use myself. I have the cushion. I have no problem. But I make a fixed income on my pensions and my husband's pension, and it's pretty healthy. It's whole families live on what? This past year, I never make it from 1 month to the other without going into savings. Luckily, I have them, but I know many people in my situation who do not have that cushion. Mm-hmm. And those are the people that we're starting to see reaching out for help. Yeah. They're embarrassed. They never thought they would see themselves in this place. That they were people who 3 years ago were donating to the food bank, are now thinking, I think I have to use the food bank.
Yeah, and I've said this lots in my whole time at Feed the Need. I'm always asked about seniors, but for our community, up until recently, seniors have actually not been a population that have been very heavily served by food banks. for many of the reasons that Gail described. We have a population of seniors here who generally have decent pensions, have never had to really live beyond what they have coming in. In the past year, we started to see a rise in the number of seniors and older people accessing food banks. But I also want to point out, though, we're also seeing a rise in people who do have incomes. More and more people who are fully employed. This is not also a trend here locally. For the second year in a row, Food Banks Canada has noted that there's no longer a direct link between unemployment and food bank use. That there's just as many people who are employed using food banks as there were people who are unemployed. And we're seeing that very clearly here as well. So across the age spectrum and the income spectrum, we're seeing a rise and people reaching out for services. We talk about food banks because that's what we do, but we're seeing it in other programs and services too that support people who are struggling.
I just can't imagine how someone, and I know people in this situation where there are two people working just above minimum wage. I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you pay your rent or your mortgage, feed your kids, clothe your kids on two incomes of $20, and that's above a minimum on $20 an hour. I just don't know how you do it.
Yeah. And we know that the living wage has increased as well, which is, well above a minimum wage rate. The cost to live in our community has gone up exponentially over the last few years. So if people are not even making a minimum or just making barely above a minimum wage, they're clearly not making a living wage, which increases the struggle.
Broadcaster Dave Trafford, many months ago, in and around a conversation with Neil Hetherington of the Daily Bread Food Bank, wrote and ranted the following: call it willful ignorance or indifference. Either way, it's a pattern and culture of inaction that all levels of government have normalized. Our governments have normalized poverty. And I don't think that's an indictment on any particular brand of government. It's like all parties and all governments. What needs to happen, and does it have to cost a lot? And what can residents do to help that is effective?
Mm-hmm. I agree with Neil on this one. And this comes out of work that we've done across the food banking world, that we're looking at it saying that we've essentially become institutionalized, and governments essentially rely on the fact that there are communities and donors and others who are willing to support the work we do, which is great. But that because of that, and we're not the only service, but we're talking about food banking because we do that, that it's been normalized, that, it's just assumed that people will be taken care of by their communities and their community organizations. And yes, they will be. That's what we're here for. But what the point Neil was making, and I think that we're making as a network of food banks across Ontario, is that we're hitting a limit. You can only expect us to do so much, and we're now dealing with systemic issues that we were not meant to deal with. We were meant to be able to provide support to people when they hit a point of struggle. We weren't meant to become the sole source of support for them for years at a time. We were not designed for that. And lots of us are figuring out how to do that, but that's not what we were originally set up to do. It's expensive. It takes time. And thankfully, we've got enough community support to be able to do it. But what we need to be saying is that we're a Band-Aid. We're not going to solve food insecurity. We make sure that people who are hungry have access to food. And that's great. That's exactly what we're here for, and we should keep doing that. And we want to keep doing that. But food insecurity is a systemic issue that requires really much more detailed, complex conversations at the national, provincial, local level that involve organizations and governments and the business community and many others. We have to really be thinking about what's causing what we do, or causing the reason for what we do. And that's what people can do, and what we need to challenge our governments to do, governments of all stripes, is to have the courage to really look at this and look at this from a systemic point of view, and not just try and find the easy solutions, not just try and find the quick Band-Aid. We need to support the Band-Aids while we do that work. We can't, say tomorrow, hey, let's close all these services because they're not solving the root problem. People still need the service, and we can't let that go away. But if we really want to delve into this, we need to start having the courage to examine what's causing these problems in the first place.
So, I mean, food banks have definitely evolved from maybe the basement of a local church or a local service organization to organizations that require a board of directors and a CEO, and I would say that's pretty institutionalized. And you've done a really good job at what you do, and which is probably why governments feel that they can lean on you. Um, so, do you see? And here I'm going to stray away from the questions that I asked you, but I have a feeling there's the expertise that you can answer this anyways. Um, do you see basic national incomes as a way that we can put food banks out of business in the right way?
Um, I'm going to answer that. I'm going to answer the second part first. We shouldn't be thinking in terms of putting food banks out of business. Because one thing
I
I
mean
will,
in the right way, just in
yeah. What I mean, and this is why I agree with you on the right way. What I mean is by that is we are some of the most innovative organizations in communities. We've got deep roots. I wouldn't want to see that infrastructure go away for any reason. We might want to change the way we do our business and maybe refocus that we're a more positive force in the community beyond responding to the challenges people face. So I would suggest that we need to be thinking in those terms. Let's not eliminate our institutions that actually could be a positive force. But yes, one of the parts of the solution is a basic income. It's not the whole solution. And I actually recently had this conversation at an international conference where I presented on this issue as someone who understands both food banking and basic income. Basic income will not actually get most Canadians to the point where they will, with a basic income alone and their current income sources, would be at a living wage. There will still be people below the living wage, but a basic income gets them much closer. It gets them much closer to that. It relieves the depth of their poverty. It relieves the depth of their food insecurity. It allows them to make many more choices that are about their life. So there are so many reasons to do something like a national basic income to allow people to have more agency and to actually be able to respond to these and take some of the immediate pressure off organizations like Feed the Need, so that maybe we're not responding just to the crisis, but we're able to start becoming a positive force in our community to address the broader issues of food insecurity. Currently, we have to respond to the hunger that people face. We would love it if we could be responding to the reasons for food insecurity and be part of the bigger solutions. A basic income, I think, would give us the breathing room to do that.
The breathing room to do it. Yeah.
Gail, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with Ben and I think with Steve. I think a basic income is a start, but it's not the answer to everything. And dismantling food banks isn't going to do that. That's not the answer either. Keep that institution to help people in crisis. Mm-hmm. What we now have is we have half the population in crisis, as opposed to people moving in and out of crisis, and people aren't moving out. That's the scary thing.
Yeah.
So I see the basic national income as kind of like one brick in the wall that might go along with reforms in education,
yes,
perhaps more vocational training, where people can get some immediate relief by becoming more marketable in the employment economy, right? And
workforce planning is definitely part of it, and we're involved with some of our partners locally on looking at how we can do better workforce planning locally, because that's exactly what you're talking about. Getting people trained and upskilled to where they can support the local workforce and the local economy.
Instead of growing the need, we need to reduce the need, and as Gail says, have the infrastructure there for people in crisis. But as you pointed out, the crisis is every day now.
Yeah, that's. The one thing I would add is a lot of the solutions, which are absolutely we need to be talking about, are very much focused on the demand side of food security. What can we do to make sure people can access the food system and get food that they need? Part of the conversation does seriously have to be the supply side. And I think recent conversations about our grocery retail sector and the monopolies that they have on prices are very important conversations that need to also be part of this. And this is a bit about what I mean when I say we need to have the courage to really examine that. Nobody is saying that our businesses shouldn't thrive. We absolutely want, our grocery businesses to survive and to thrive in many ways, but not at the expense of people accessing food that they need. Right. And so we need to be also looking at what is the supply side of our food system, And I would say this is the same argument that maybe isn't our expertise, but needs to be looked at around housing and other issues as well. Is that we need to be looking at both sides, not only the demand for these things that comes from people, and what do we need to do to give people better access to those those things, but also what does the supply side look like, and what changes maybe could be considered on that side of things that actually improve the situation. So it's more of a coming together from both ends versus sort of one end coming to meeting the other one. So
There's no one simple solution
no,
to really
no.
reduce the need and get it pared down to the crisis situation. So that's really good information. So Exit 425, one of the objectives is to engage people and have them more involved in the policy and everything else that is going on around our lives, right? And so part of it is how do we support the immediate needs of Feed the Need in Durham, and then what would you say we need to do in terms of addressing the policy or supply side?
Well, certainly. I mean, we're coming into our holiday season where we bring in the majority of the money that we need to run for a whole year. So, if you can, we ask people to give, and to give as generously as you can, but don't leave yourself short. The other thing, there are a number of local agencies that we support, and they're always looking for volunteers. We're looking for volunteers. If you've got some time, we would ask to call your local food bank and ask if they need any help, and they likely do. Those are some of the things you can do in terms of policy. Certainly, every time there's an election, every time you interact with a government representative of all levels, you have to make sure that they understand that you understand that this is a crisis, and that we're relying on them to come up with some answers to make sure that people aren't having to line up at food banks.
Yeah, and I would just add, we're not quite at the point where we have the confidence to suggest what we think the major policy shifts are as an organization. But what we do want people to do is, and we want to be there to help them, is learn. We're at a point of learning ourselves. Educate yourselves. What are the real challenges that cause food insecurity in the first place? What are they? And then how can we locally start to respond to some of that? What can we do here in our own community? Yes, there are some bigger policy discussions that have to happen, certainly at the national and the provincial level, around how we manage our policy around these things in our food systems. But there's lots we can start doing in innovative ways locally, and I think we just want people around us to have those conversations. Reach out to organizations like ours and just bring us ideas, and we'll chat about them. We're not necessarily going to take on everything, but we're very willing to talk to our community about what they think might be a solution to some of the challenges that they're feeling and seeing. And we're not going to get anywhere if we don't have those conversations locally. We really need to start them here, and then they will cascade up the ladder if we do it right.
I go back to 2005 or 2006 when the Ontario government introduced the Ontario Child Benefit. It was designed at Daily Bread, not by me. I am not. Someone named Michael Oliphant, who was our policy person, he designed it. I got to sell it to Dalton McGuinty and Greg Sabera, and they embraced it, and that has helped a lot of families. Yes. So there are good policy. Policy can come out of food banks, but right now we're too busy dealing in crisis to be thinking a lot as much about policy as I would like we were.
Mm-hmm. And you guys are collectors of ideas from the public, but as Colin Powell said, you really want to know how things are going, talk to the soldier with boots on the ground. And evidence that that child benefit came from someone at Daily Bread Food Bank, that's not insignificant. So I appreciate that. I appreciate that information. On the immediate need, and you pointed out this is the beginning of we've got U.S. Thanksgiving tomorrow, and things are starting to really ramp up to crazy level, and that's one of your greatest times of need, and a big time to build your reserves. Are we going to see the big bins in the grocery stores? And I'm sure there's hockey teams and sports organizations and clubs and schools that are going to be collecting and donating. So do they just go to the grocery stores, or can they come right to Feed the Need in Durham?
So if they can come right to us, you'll see a variety of organizations in our grocery stores. It's not just us. What I can say is that 99% of them that you see in the grocery store are associated with Feed the Need in our network. We do serve 65 organizations. So even if it's not a Feed the Need bin, if it's a Salvation Army or a Durham Outlook for the Needy, they're part of our network. So anyway, and that's great too. We don't. It's not just about us; it's about our network. Not all the food has to go through Feed the Need to get where it needs to be. So we encourage people to support those organizations as well. If you want to support Feed the Need directly, the best way to do it, come to our website, feedtheneedindurham.ca, see what's going on. We keep fairly up to date about what's actually happening broadly. We have lots of groups who are doing things for us. So if someone approaches you and says, I'm raising funds or food for Feed the Need, that's, they could already be doing it in your network, in your community. We ask that, just support them. And reach out to us if you want to do something more. On your own. We're happy to have the support. You will see a lot of us over the next month or so in the community, our bins, our presence on the radio and other places, just because, like Gail said, this is our biggest fundraising and food drive season. We need to be as present as possible so that we can continue to do the work that we do. We've always had amazing support from the community. What the message I think I would say to everybody is that while we know people maybe they're struggling themselves a little bit, maybe don't have as much to give as this year, any contribution is valuable, because the needs of your neighbors who are struggling have gone up in ways that we couldn't have predicted even a year ago. So if you can give anything, please reach out and pledge that support, because we are really facing a crisis right now, and we need to be able to not only meet that but survive it and get through it so that we can do the other work that we talked about at the other end of this.
I appreciate you taking the time today to talk with Exit 425 and me, and it's always a learning experience, and you've broadened my understanding of it as well, and broadened my understanding of the work that you do as well. Thank you so much for joining me today. What's the best way for people to reach you directly or to reach out to you?
Through our website is the best way, feedtheneedindurham.ca. That's the best way to reach out to us. Even if they don't, just do a Google search if they don't remember that for Feed the Need in Durham, and you'll find us. And just reach out. Our phone number, everything is there. You can find us and reach out that way.
I'll certainly add links to whatever I post and however I post it, and so people can see that as well. Thank you very much for both Gail and Ben for taking the time today to speak with me. It's amazing what you do, and obviously you have an impact, and we would just like to reduce the need for Feed the Need, and make sure that people are doing well without you. That sounds really strange, but I think that's your objective as well, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It is. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And to all who are listening, thank you for listening and watching this podcast, this episode of Exit 425. Please like and subscribe on whatever platform you use. Our mission is to provide substantial information and education that goes where you want, because it's where we live. Exit 425 is a production of Studio 38 Audio, copyright 2023. My name is Steve Ray. If you have questions or would like more information about Exit 425, join our Exit 425 Facebook group, like the Facebook page. Check out Instagram, Medium, X, and TikTok, or email me at exit425401@gmail.com. Exit 425, it's where we live.